Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by The Great Courses Plus. Yes, unlimited video learning with the world's greatest professors, including the brand new course, Fundamentals of Photography. Check it out at thegreatcoursesplus.com/goodseats. You'll get a free month for a limited time of all the great coursework at thegreatcoursesplus.com/goodseats for your free month. Check it out. Here's our show.
I've met so many wonderful, unforgettable people, players, coaches, general managers, members of the front office, fans, broadcast partners over the years. It's difficult to pull out one that stands out above the others, but I can do it. It's the big redhead, Bill Walton. He was a finals MVP in 1977 when I first ran into him as he led the Portland Trail Blazers to an NBA title over the Philadelphia 76ers. The following year, he was named the league's most valuable player. Bill was simply the best player in basketball. In the summer of 1979, our second season coming up in San Diego, I kept hearing from San Diego Clipper coach Gene Shue the team had a very real shot at signing Walton as a free agent. The thought was positively intoxicating. Bill grew up in San Diego, where legendary UCLA coach John Wooden discovered him as a promising young hoop talent while at Helix High School in La Mesa. Yeah, John Wooden knew what he was seeing. Bringing the 7-foot center back home would put the Clippers on the map. The team had drawn less than 8,000 fans a night in their first season in San Diego. Free agency was very different in those days. Commissioner Larry O'Brien had the absolute right to determine compensation for the team that lost a player to a rival in free agency. Coach Shue believed that he'd likely lose one of his two very capable centers, Swen Nader or Kevin Kunert, and possibly high-scoring six-man Freeman Williams, who'd gone to school at Portland State, but certainly no more than that. Well, the Clippers made Walton the biggest free agent signing in NBA history and made the Big Redhead the league's first $1 million a year player in seizing him off the Trailblazer roster. O'Brien's compensation was stunning. The Clippers lost two key starters, the second and third best players in power forward Kermit Washington and guard and former All-Star MVP Randy Smith, along with Kunert. Wow. Still, the Clippers had Walton. Airplane towed banners over the beaches acclaiming Clippers sign Walton. An extraordinary news conference was held at the San Diego Sports Arena. It marked the first time I ever saw Walton in a suit and tie. Looked good. Said all the right things about being thrilled to be back home, and he was healthy and ready to lead the Clippers to an NBA title. I was sitting with Bill in the afterglow of the celebration at the sports arena. He said, "Sorry, I gotta leave." I said, "What's up?" He said, "Going to the hospital to have surgery on my ankle." That might be the first time I ever said, "Oh me, oh my." Walt would play only 14 games for the Clippers that year, and that was 14 more than he'd play the next 2 years. To this day, Bill blames himself for the failure of the NBA in his beloved home city. It's unnecessarily harsh assessment, but it does reflect Bill Walton's lasting regret.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Oh me, oh my. How are you, friends? It's Tim Hanlon, and I welcome you to the proceedings that we like to call Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast, our little exploration each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. Indeed, that was the dulcet tones of Mr. Ralph Lawler, the newly inducted and Kurt Gowdy Media Award winner at the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame for his years of being the voice of the now Los Angeles Clippers. And that's the focus of our conversation this week with our guest, Mick Minas. You heard there perhaps one of the most interesting parts of the very curious story of the Clippers franchise, which it currently, of course, is in Los Angeles. And we think, given Steve Ballmer's ownership and the discussion around a new stadium and in Inglewood and the drama around that, it seems to be that's where the loyalties lie, is still to keep this franchise in L.A. But, you know, you fans in L.A. of a certain age may not even remember that the team, you know, for a good 8 years or so was based in San Diego, and they were known as the San Diego Clippers. And in that little discussion there, with Mr. Lawler, you get a sense of perhaps a little bit of the snake bit nature of this franchise, which is going to be sort of the focus of our conversation with Mick Minas coming up in just a few moments. Is this a franchise that's been cursed? It's a very curious and perhaps one of the most checkered histories, I guess, of any franchise in the NBA. And we're going to kind of circle around perhaps some of the reasons as to why the Clippers have been such a, I don't know, it's an amazing story around seemingly making efforts to sort of right the franchise, and all of a sudden, then shooting themselves in the foot. Some of it's just bad luck, and frankly, some of it's just bad management. I mean, the Donald Sterling escapade that we've recently experienced in the last couple of years. But as you heard in that clip, some of it was kind of almost predestined, I guess, when the Clippers decided to sort of roll the dice and go for the big one. That is Mr. Bill Walton, obviously a legendary figure in NBA history for sure. But back in the day, in the late 70s, the Clippers were basically willing to bet the franchise, literally and figuratively, on Big Bill. And as you sort of heard discussed there, let's put it this way, it didn't go well. And there were a number of reasons as to why. Bill has been pretty straightforward and frankly, even a bit maybe overly harsh about his attempt to kind of sort of bring the Clippers franchise to postseason and championship glory. And it just didn't turn out that way. And the foot and the injuries and all that kind of stuff certainly conspired. But it was by no means the last or the only misfortune to befall the Clippers of San Diego version in the 70s and early 80s. And of course, as they've sort of lumbered along in their Los Angeles lives in the old sports arena, and being, frankly, the second, or if you really think about it, the third in line tenant at the current Staples Center. There's a lot of drama, of course. Donald Sterling and all his shenanigans, and arguably one of the most, curious owners. Let's put it that way. Maybe I'm being charitable. But we get into all of that sort of Clippers history. We even do a little backstopping with the origination of this franchise, which, of course, was in the city of Buffalo, New York, as the Buffalo Braves. We've talked about in a previous episode. Look up that episode with Tim Wendel that we did about 6 months ago, and you can sort of get the entire sort of elongated history of this franchise. But we're going to focus today kind of on the incarnation of this franchise as they became and went on as the Clippers, the San Diego version mostly, but we'll also get into the early years as the Los Angeles Clippers. And you're going to find out, as most current Clippers fans know, and I'm sure Steve Ballmer recognized it when he bought the team from Mr. Sterling in that sort of dramatic fashion a couple of years back. This is a team that has been luckless for the vast majority of its lifetime. It's a fascinating topic. We're going to sort of domicile a lot of it around the sort of San Diego version, the 8 years down there. And it's just every turn, every corner, just every opportunity you think the franchise is going to turn it around, just it goes awry and then some. And we'll continue to follow it. We're just fascinated by all of it. And, there's no doubt the team is on the ascendance. And clearly by getting its own arena someday, knock on wood, it is perhaps the opportunity to finally become its own sort of standard, I guess, of basketball without sort of being sort of that second or third class citizen in the current arena that the Lakers and the LA Kings currently occupy at the Staples Center. All right, so that's kind of the sort of enticing subject we're going to get into this week with Mick Minas coming up in just a couple of moments as we talk about the curse, if you will, that is, of the current Los Angeles Clippers. And by the way, Mick's book is called The Curse, The Colorful and Chaotic History of the LA Clippers. So there's nobody more qualified than Mr. Mick Minas to guide us through this little escapade, and we're going to get into it in just a moment. Before we do so, of course, we want to say thank you to our good friend in San Diego, conveniently, Dean Mitchell, and his friends at the site known as sportshistorycollectibles.com. Yep, sportshistorycollectibles.com. All kinds of awesome souvenirs of yore from teams and leagues, either previously domiciled or previously incarnated, or just frankly just out and out defunct and no longer with us. And it's a treasure trove. It's basically a curated eBay, if you will, but in a well-lit kind of, high class kind of environment. You don't have to worry about the quality of the goods at sportshistorycollectibles.com because it's top quality stuff. And of course, we've got not only a promo code for you, that's Good Seats, and you're going to get 15% off all of your purchases at sportshistorycollectibles.com using that promo code Good Seats. But you're also conveniently going to find a whole smattering of stuff around the Clippers, both the LA version as well as the San Diego version. Some really cool stuff. If you click on through, you see, and they're all well photographed and stuff, so you can really get a sense of what you're going to be getting and get a real confident sense that what you're purchasing is of the highest quality. But there's a smart looking San Diego Clippers 1981-82 media guide that's there. You want some San Diego Clippers ticket stubs from the early 80s. They got those in there. There's a cool set of San Diego Clippers schedules, pocket schedules, really cool stuff there. What else? We got some LA Clippers stuff, so including especially some of the first year Clippers exploits in Los Angeles. For example, they've got the Los Angeles Clippers inaugural season ticket brochure in there. And I think the theme that year was Clippers basketball taking LA by storm. Well, I don't know if it was storm. Maybe it was certainly cloudy with a hefty amount of showers and thunderstorms for sure. But those are among the many items you're going to find, not just Clippers related, but basketball generally and tons of other sports at sportshistorycollectibles.com. You will waste quite a bit of time for sure. It's not a waste. It's a quality use of your time, but I guarantee you will not get that time back because you will be fascinated by literally all the things available. And again, of course, when you find an item or two or seven that you're really interested in, of course, please, by all means, use that promo code Good Seats. And again, get 15% off all of your purchases. Once again, it's sportshistorycollectibles.com. I almost feel like we need a theme song for that, or maybe a jingle or something like that. Dean, maybe you can get on that. But once again, sportshistorycollectibles.com. We thank you to Dean and his pals in San Diego. Check him out. As they say, you'll be glad you did. All right, so enough of that, and onward, shall we, into, this book is fascinating, this conversation is fascinating, this topic is endlessly interesting. This is the story of the current LA Clippers and the curse, quote unquote, the colorful and chaotic history of this very interesting team. As we get into it with Mick Minas, our new pal down in Australia, and here's our chat, and please, as always, enjoy. I can tell by your Brooklyn accent that you're not from the LA or the San Diego or the area. How did you come across the Clippers in general, and then why to sort of go deep in a book and investigate this crazy story, or at least their iteration in San Diego and maybe their earlier stays in LA? Why and how?
So I in my sort of previous life, I was a basketball coach down here in Australia. And we took a team over to the States in 2008 and traveled sort of around California and Nevada and Arizona and played some sort of junior colleges and some lower level, like sort of Division III college, that sort of level. And part of that trip was we got to go and see the Clippers season opener. And so everyone on the team was really excited to go see the Clippers and they're playing the Lakers, and the Lakers were coming off the NBA Finals loss to the Celtics, and the Clippers had just signed Baron Davis. So it was just sort of like, big build up to the game, and especially a big build up for us coming from Australia, and for a lot of the people on the team, it was their first exposure to a live NBA game. And anyway, the Clippers ended up losing by, I think it was like 40 points. But it was like they were down by 20 points at quarter time. It was just, they were just completely blown off the court. And it struck me as being, well, one, it was a very disappointing game to watch. But it also struck me as being, like you see blowouts in the NBA all the time, but you don't often see blowouts on opening night where, both teams are relatively healthy. And so that kind of sparked an interest with myself and someone else who was on the team. And we got back to Australia and we would sort of send each other articles back and forth about the Clippers, like both the modern incarnation and sort of old stories about the Clippers. And the more I read, the more I sort of got interested and intrigued. And I already knew sort of like half the Clipper history from my sort of just my previous reading and following of the NBA. And then I started finding out all these other really interesting, quirky stories. And it became sort of apparent that like someone should write a book about this. And then I thought I should write a book about this.
Well, that's interesting. So this was a Clippers game at the old LA Sports Arena, correct?
No, this was at Staples.
Got it. So this is even sort of in their most current modern sort of existence, even prior to Ballmer, right?
Yeah. So this was So still Donald Sterling was still the owner. And I think the thing that really fueled that sort of interest in the Clippers was that they had just signed Baron Davis, and so he was a LA local coming home to play for the Clippers. Very high profile player and also extremely popular player in the sort of Southern California area. And I don't think we didn't go into the game expecting the Clippers to finish the season with a better record than the Lakers, but the sort of at the time the sort of local media hype around the team was that they had a good team and they looked like they could potentially be a playoff team that year, and to see them lose and just to lose in such a sort of to put forward such an insipid performance on opening night, it really sort of struck a chord with me.
So so you say and your friends you kind of semi-adopted this Clippers franchise as an entree to the NBA, but a curiosity at that. Where do you start and how do you kind of go into finding out this situation? Like, where is the demarcation, right? Because it's pretty clear in this book that you kind of really start sort of with the, I guess, San Diego incarnation and kind of bow humbly towards the Braves that came before it from Buffalo.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a lot of research into the Buffalo era, and a lot of it ended up getting chopped just purely for length, because the book is long as it is, and you could make a case to say that you could start the book from the Donald Sterling era and just focus on Donald's time as owner. But I thought that the early years in San Diego were really intriguing, so I didn't want to lose them. And I thought the Buffalo time was really interesting as well. So I made the decision to shorten the Buffalo, the sort of the depth we went into in the Buffalo era. I kind of shortened that and focused on how the Buffalo Braves morphed into the San Diego Clippers, which in and of itself is a really fascinating story.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. We've had a couple of explorations of the Braves. Tim Wendel, who's written the seminal book about it, we kind of went deep on that, and we've got an episode in the can coming up in a couple of weeks on an enigmatic player that actually was in both incarnations, both the Braves and the Clippers, he being one Marvin Barnes. But so how does San Diego then get on the radar of the folks in Buffalo? How does that sort of cross-country transformation happen? Because San Diego had its dalliances with pro basketball, prior to that, right? I mean, you had the conquistadors of the ABA, which became the Sails and kind of sort of literally and figuratively sailed away with the ABA itself. And you also had the San Diego Rockets, which had bolted, in the early part of the 70s as well to Houston, right? There was a time when San Diego had two pro basketball teams, but for a number of years, frankly, hadn't. So what made the, I guess, Braves organization think that San Diego was going to be golden this time around?
Well, it's very complicated. I mean, it's one of the most intriguing sort of transactions in NBA history. So you had, and it links into another NBA team. So it basically links into what was happening in Boston at the time. So the Celtics had been bought by Irv Levin, who was a Hollywood movie producer who first year he owned the Celtics, they won the NBA championship. That was like in 76. So he had this great start to his tenure as owner, but that quickly soured. And over the next 2 years, some key players were moved on, one being Paul Silas, and they were moved on mainly for financial considerations, that being the team didn't want to pay what the sort of going rate was for those players. And, obviously Boston fans, particularly at that time, were very used to success. I mean, there was a period there for a 20-year period where the Celtics won 13 of the 20 NBA championships. So, this is an era where the Celtic fans were used to, a season that didn't finish with the championship was considered a failure. And here you have the Celtics missing the playoffs altogether. So Irv Levin became the sort of public enemy number one in Boston. He was the person who took the rap for, the team's floundering fortunes. So Irv Levin started thinking, I want to get out of Boston. Now, I'm not enjoying this. And at the same time, he was also, he lived in Hollywood. So he was sort of splitting his time between, traveling from Southern California over to Boston to watch games and then returning back to California for his work commitments. So Levin wanted to move the team to California. Now, obviously, the NBA didn't want the Boston Celtics to be relocated. That was their sort of most famous brand franchise they had, and the last thing you'd want to do was to pull them out of Boston and move them over to California. But luckily, at the same time, you had a guy who owned the Buffalo Braves who was looking to get out of Buffalo. And he's an interesting character as well. So he's John Y. Brown was the owner of the Braves at the time. And he had previously been an ABA owner. He owned the Kentucky Colonels in the ABA, and he'd folded that team, took a big payout from the NBA, and then he used the money to buy the Braves. And so he wanted to leave Buffalo. And someone from the NBA had the bright idea of saying, well, we could fix both of these problems if we get these two owners to swap their teams, so to swap ownership of their teams. So at the end of the year owners meeting, a sub meeting was sort of organized where John Y. Brown and Irv Levin sat down, and they came up with a plan whereby Irv Levin would become owner of the Braves, John Y. Brown would become owner of the Celtics, and then the Celtics would stay in Boston, and Irv Levin would be free to pull the Braves out of Buffalo and move them over to California, and thus the San Diego Clippers were born.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've obviously talked about John Y. Brown with the Colonels, actually this week with our episode with Dan Issel. So it's very interesting because both Levin, of course, but interestingly Brown, right? Arguably are sort of part of the ancestry of this franchise, right? So, but why San Diego, as far as you can tell, versus given that both the NBA and the ABA had literally come and gone not too many years earlier, right? So the Braves moved in 78, right? And I think the ABA was done around 76. The sales were kind of done a little bit before then, and the Rockets had left even a few years earlier than that. So as far as you can tell, why San Diego being the promised land?
Yeah, I guess Levin had John Y. Brown, when he was considering moving the Braves, and he was actively shopping the franchise around and fielding offers from all different cities. And I remember Dallas was one, San Diego was one. And I think for Levin, San Diego ticked the box in that he would be able to have his work interest and his basketball interest and still be at the same home base. So he'd be able to, travel to Los Angeles to do his movie stuff and then have an easy commute to San Diego to be part of the basketball stuff. So I mean, it seems kind of bizarre now to think about, making such a big commercial decision on the basis of making your commute to the game easy. But I think essentially that's what it would have come down to for Irv Levin, that he couldn't put the team in Los Angeles because the Lakers were already there and the NBA rules precluded moving the team to Los Angeles. And so I think San Diego was kind of like the next best option.
Yeah, well, in venture capital, right? I guess that's looked upon as being ingenious, right? You want to stay within a few, 50, 100 miles of your investments so that you can supposedly, add value and be regularly on call. But, well, that's especially interesting given the dalliances and then ultimately the move to L.A. years down the road. But all right, so the Clippers, let's discuss them as San Diego, right? So it's new branding, it's a new team, Gene Shue, a decent coach. almost made the playoffs. Some clear personalities already starting to make their way into this team, including a one World B Free, not his birth name for sure. Maybe you can give a little sense of sort of how they kind of made their initial mark on San Diego and how San Diego either embraced or didn't so early on.
Yeah, I think that first team is probably one of my favorite Clipper teams. And I was lucky I got to interview a lot of the players from that first team and Gene Shu. And I think that he did a really good job in that. I mean, they won 43 games. They ultimately missed the playoffs, but they finished with a above 500 record. And that was after a really bad start as well. I mean, I think they started off like 6-17 or something like that. And then they came back from that to finish with 43 wins. And it was built on the back of, World B Free was sort of the centerpiece of the team. And he had been sort of he'd been in the background in Philadelphia, playing on that really fantastic Sixers team led by Dr. J. But he was clearly a guy that was ready for sort of his own team and to take center stage. But the things that characterized that team was just they were really a close-knit team. All the people I spoke to reflected on across their NBA careers, playing in lots of different cities, lots of different teammates and everything. And that first year in San Diego being one where they felt like it was more than just a team, that they were almost like family, and the players used to do things outside of the games and trainings together. And they had this really good camaraderie that translated into success on the court, probably above what was expected of them.
Well, Free was something else right out of the gate, right? In his new place. I mean, both those first two seasons, he and Gervin really kind of lit it up. I mean, Free, I think, was the second leading scorer both of those seasons, right? I mean, he was not afraid to shoot. And I do I have this right? I mean, the fans even got into it, maybe even comically, right? Where as soon as he got the ball, they were telling him to shoot because he had these great rainbow shots. No matter where it was in the court.
And he was snubbed for the All-Star team in his first year with the Clippers, and the second year he made the All-Star team. But both years he finished, and I think the second year he finished like 0.6 or 0.8 points behind Gervin for the leading scorer. So he was marginally off being the NBA's top scorer.
What was your sense of how they were received by the fans and the press in San Diego? I mean, there had to be a little bit of eyebrow raising and or, looks askance that, here yet again was another pro basketball team where two, solid shots, or 2.5 solid shots, if you consider the renamed Conquistadors into the Sales of the ABA, kind of floundered.
I think at first that was the attitude, and I think that by halfway through that first season that they had won people over. And I think that just goes to show, you would know this, Tim, time and time again in professional sports, people love a winner. If your team is winning, it's very easy to sort of get community support and get the media support and get people interested. And you can have the best marketing campaign and all that sort of stuff behind the scenes, but nothing sort of builds support better than a successful team. And I think that that's what that first year Clipper team did, that they very quickly proved that they were a legitimate NBA team. They had some really good wins in the second half of the season, at home especially. I think they beat the Celtics at home and a couple other wins against some of the best, like the top teams in the NBA. And so I think that ultimately if you look at the crowd figures from that year, they start off pretty mediocre, but by the end of the season, they're playing in front of sellout crowds at home. And that, to me, is attributable to the fact that they were winning games. And the fans in San Diego could see, unlike the other two, the Rockets and the Sales, or the ABA version, that they could see that this team was a legitimate pro basketball team.
Well, and it seemed like after that first season, arguably the honeymoon, right? That it was certainly on the ascendance, because in comes probably one of the more well-known figures in the checkered history of this franchise, a guy by the name of Bill Walton, a San Diego native, and I get the sense that his arrival for the next season, this is the 79-80 season, was looked upon as a true shot in the arm for this team, fledgling team. I mean, he was only 2 years behind having won the NBA championship and MVP award with the Trailblazers. So, this is arguably before the legendary knee trouble and stuff. But him coming onto the teams probably just seemed like a cinch, no?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very risky move insofar as it depended on how you looked at him. So if you looked at Bill Walton with the glass half full approach, you say he was arguably the best player in the NBA when he was healthy. I mean, he played the year that Blazers won the championship, they played the Lakers and Kareem in the Western Conference Finals, and the Western Conference Finals were over in 8 days. I mean, they swept the Lakers 4-0, and Walton outplayed Kareem. So, I mean, he won. He'd had championship in Portland with a modestly talented team, and they beat that really stacked Philadelphia team in the finals. He had a Finals MVP award. The next season, he won the league MVP, despite the fact that he missed 22 games, I think, with injury. You could check that, but he missed. No one has missed more regular season games and still claim the league MVP award than Bill Walton, and it's by a mile. Like, no one's come close to missing as many games as he did. So that could tell you. You can look at that one of two ways. You could say, well, look at how talented Bill Walton was. He was able to win MVP despite missing a quarter of the season. Or you could look at it and say, wow, like, this is a person who missed a quarter of the season. Why did he miss a quarter of the season? Because he had chronic injury problems. And he had never come close to playing 82 games during his time at Portland. I think across the 4 years at Portland, he had played half the regular season games, something like that. So he had consistently had injury problems. So the downside would be, well, we're signing this person. Do we know that he's going to be able to? We're going to contribute. We're going to commit a lot of resources to getting Bill Walton here. Do we know that he's going to be able to actually get out there and play for us? But that was a risk that the Clippers ultimately decided to take. And hindsight shows that they got the very, very, very injured version of Bill Walton.
Yeah, well, and he also had taken the year off, so to speak, because he was having a dispute with the Blazers management about how, I guess, he and some of his teammates were being treated and whatnot. So I mean, he really had sat out the 78-79 season as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess you can see it as a risk, and obviously hindsight is 20/20, but certainly things beyond his playing capabilities, right? I mean, he's a San Diego native. He's a name, certainly well known in Southern California from his legendary collegiate career. And it looks like the Blazers did pretty well by trading him, getting a few good resources in Kermit Washington and Kevin Kerr, and even a first-round draft pick for the next year, for God's sakes. I mean, a pretty big move that, I think pretty quickly kind of proved to be not a fair exchange, given all the injuries and whatnot.
Yeah, and actually one of the interesting things, Tim, was at the time, he signed as a free agent, but they didn't have the same free agency rules that they have now. And so what happened was, if you signed another team's free agent, you had to compensate the team. So you couldn't just sign a player and then that was it, you had their rights. You had to then compensate the team that you took the player from. So Portland and the Clippers had gone back and forth about what was fair compensation. And the Portland front office were just asking for ridiculous level of compensation. I think they wanted 4 first-round draft picks, 3 of the Clippers' starting 5, and like a huge sum of money. And so they couldn't come to an agreement. And so what happened was the commissioner of the NBA, Larry O'Brien, had to decide what was fair compensation. So in that year's training camp, they actually started out with everybody there training all together. So Bill Walton, when he was first at training camp, he was there with Kermit Washington and Randy Smith. They were all there together playing. And Gene Shue told me that there was a training session where they got notified by the league which players were going to be leaving. And so then Gene Shue left the court, went to his office and called the players in one by one to inform them that they were actually heading to Portland. And Bill Walton was out there on the court and he could just see players leaving the court, to go and meet with Gene Shu, and then them sort of packing up their stuff and leaving. And he just felt horrible at the thought that, oh, here I am, I'm breaking up this really. And you remember we were saying 5 minutes ago, that initial Clippers team, one of the things that the sort of foundation it was built upon was the close-knit relationships that they had. And now all of a sudden, some of the most important parts of that team, especially Kermit Washington and Randy Smith, were being shipped off to allow Bill Walton to join the team.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it wasn't a trade per se; it was a free agency thing with some intervention from the league about sort of equitable. And that's interesting. Well, but I mean, that said, I mean, Walton has been pretty outspoken about sort of, in retrospect, his playing days in San Diego. I mean, he sat out the season, he re-injured the same foot, and as he had in extensive rehab. I mean, he certainly crawled his way back, into more playing time over the years. But, he was still part of the roster for 6 seasons, right? But something interesting also happens during that course, and maybe we'll get to his denouement in a minute. It didn't take very long for Levin and his associates to kind of bag on the franchise not too soon after moving to San Diego. Was it 2 seasons? And then they finally figured out that they wanted out?
3 seasons, I believe.
There you go. Right.
I believe it was 3 seasons. So, yeah, Levin, but I think Levin made the decision. He had some personal stuff happening at the time as well. His second wife had passed away. The team was not doing very well. He was copying a lot of criticism in the media for signing Bill Walton, because Bill Walton, across his first, so yeah, it was 3 seasons, because across Bill Walton's first 2 seasons with the Clippers, he played a total of 14 games.
It's unbelievable. So, and no wonder people get on. I mean, it's just, and some of it's bad luck, but, so much hype and resources, and frankly, lost players in the process. Yeah.
And I think I don't know, like if I was in that position, I probably would have made the same move. I mean, because Bill Walton's a transcendent player, and like you said, all the factors going in his favor, like that he was a hometown, high profile, very unique player. Like I don't think the NBA's ever had a big man who can pass the ball like Bill Walton before or since. So Levin ultimately made the decision that he wanted to sell the team. And one of the things that's interesting, I don't know, it's like a lesser known fact, was the first person that he seriously investigated selling the team to was to Phil Knight, the Nike CEO. And Phil Knight and Irv Levin had gone as far as to draw up like a schedule of payments of like what date, what amount of money would be paid for transferring the ownership of the team across. And then Phil Knight, for some reason, got cold feet and pulled out of the deal. And Irv Levin then went to pursue sort of legal action against Phil Knight, saying, "Well, we had an agreement," and presented the sort of schedule of payments that they had drawn up. And the court said, "No, that's not a legal agreement. You just had a discussion about how the payments might work." But in an alternate universe, Phil Knight could have been the owner of the Clippers instead of Donald Sterling, which would have made for I dare say that the next 30 years would have played out very differently.
All right, hang in there, everybody. We're going to be back to our conversation in just a second, but time quickly to pay a couple of bills. And you've heard me talk about The Great Courses Plus on some previous episodes. And if you haven't tried it, well, by golly, this is one of your last opportunities to get a free month of unlimited video learning with the world's greatest professors when you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/goodseats. You're going to get a free month of unlimited access to the entire library of thousands of hours of great lectures and tons of great coursework from The Great Courses Plus. Look, you're interested in things like sports psychology. You ever wonder if there's life on Mars? You want to learn how to invest or possibly improve your muscle tonnage with strength training? Well, there's a whole bunch of those kind of courses and more across topics like history and science and food and wine and various hobbies, health and fitness, personal and professional development, you name it. And I highly recommend their brand new course made or put together in conjunction with National Geographic called Fundamentals of Photography. Yeah, you kids today, you think with your smartphones, you think you can kind of handle everything. You got all kinds of filters and lenses and stuff, and you've got it all covered, right? Well, no, you don't, Einstein. You've got lots of amazing technical capabilities that only a professional photographer and one you can learn from at The Great Courses Plus can teach you. Things like aperture and lens sizes and things like shutter speeds and there's all kinds of stuff, and there's different ways to shoot stuff, whether it's digital or, God forbid, you even use film for that sort of high quality, sort of retro look. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that you young whippersnappers have no idea. And I highly encourage you to check out Fundamentals of Photography among the dozens and dozens of other great courses and hundreds and thousands of hours of great learning that will be yours, all yours, at The Great Courses Plus. And again, that's thegreatcoursesplus.com/good seats, and you will get 1 free month of unlimited, yes, I said unlimited access to the entire library of the Great Courses Plus service and offerings. It's a tremendous opportunity. There's so many great things in there, and I guarantee that a month will not be enough, and you will be converted, like I am and have been, to the great stuff that is The Great Courses Plus. Once again, thegreatcoursesplus.com/good seats for a limited time offer of a free month of the entire service. Unlimited access. You get the app. You can stream it to any device. You can download them. You can listen to them in audio form. It's all there for you once again at thegreatcoursesplus.com/good seats. Get your free month. Enjoy it. Let me know how you love it, because I guarantee you will. And now, back to our conversation. So what was it about Sterling that kind of raised his profile and ultimately cinched the deal for him? He was by trade a real estate guy and an attorney, I guess, by education, right? So was he a Southern California kind of guy too? What was his story and why the NBA and the Clippers?
So the Donald Sterling Los Angeles Clippers, it all begins with actually Jerry Buss buying the Lakers, because when Jerry Buss bought the Lakers, it may not seem like a lot of money now, but at the time he paid over $67 million for a package of assets, and the assets were the Lakers, the Los Angeles Kings, the Forum, and also a big block of land in Nevada. And obviously $67 million is a lot of money today. I mean, it's a lot of money in the 70s. If you say in the sort of mid-70s, $67 million is a huge sum of money. And he didn't actually have that amount of cash to be able to pay for it. So he needed to liquidate some of his assets quickly. Now, Jerry Buss moved in the same circles as Donald Sterling. So Donald Sterling at the time, as you said, he was a lawyer, but he had invested most of the money he'd earned through being a lawyer into property. And Donald Sterling had copped a lot of criticism, especially in the last sort of 5 years. But he was a very visionary in terms of the way he built his real estate portfolio. I mean, he realized that the population boom was coming to California, and he bought up a lot of property when it was very cheap, and held on to it and didn't sell anything, refinanced, bought more property, refinanced, bought more property. And this is the way he built his wealth. So when Jerry Buss came along and said, hey, I need some money, can I sell? I think it was 11 apartments that he wanted to sell. Donald Sterling stepped in and said, yep, I'll buy them for you. So Donald Sterling actually played a role in Jerry Buss becoming owner of the Lakers. Now, when Buss became owner of the Lakers, he won the championship in his first year. Sterling was sitting on the sidelines watching this, saying, oh, my friend's just bought this team. He's won a championship. The media love him. He's got this big profile now. He's friends with Magic. He's, moving and shaking around Los Angeles. And I think Donald Sterling wanted a piece of that action as well. He was only 47 at the time he bought the Clippers, but he had a lot of money. I think his net worth was estimated at over $300 million at the time. And so when Irv Levin was looking for someone to offload the team to, Donald Sterling was a likely candidate.
So Sterling comes in and kind of, I want to say shoots his mouth off, but he vowed to spend lots of money to build him into a contender. I think he famously said, or maybe some advertising said, "My promise that I will make you proud of the Clippers." I think that's an interesting setup that is another sort of plank on the doom that this ship was starting to take on. I mean, I guess he was jealous or wanting to emulate what Buss and his family had done relatively quickly with certainly the Lakers, a little bit later the Kings, and the Forum, of course, too. But it just seems like he kind of, got off on the wrong foot, and maybe it was bad luck, or maybe it wasn't luck at all.
Yeah, he came in. You're right. He took out advertising, like big billboards around San Diego, but instead of promoting, the team and the star players, he put his own face on the billboards. He took out a full page ad in the San Diego newspaper saying that, I think he wrote like an open letter to the fans of San Diego, promising that he was going to make the team a winner and he'd spend what it took. But, professional sports is filled throughout the history of owners coming in and thinking that it's going to be, that their success in other fields is going to translate to their success in sports ownership, franchise ownership, and that they'll be able to just sort of click their fingers and make a few moves. But it doesn't work like that. And I think he found out very quickly that it was going to be a much more difficult task than what he had initially anticipated.
So I guess what we know now, but I don't know where it was evident or sort of becoming evident, but promising to spend money. I mean, we've heard this theme many, many, many times, right? The sort of you buy the franchise, and then you kind of also then need to continue to invest to actually run the franchise. And it seems like maybe that second part was elusive, if I could construct the narrative a little bit well. I mean, he wasn't, well, okay, was he or wasn't he a cheapskate, I guess? I mean, Bill Walton, famously, there's a great quote that I found in my crack research is, besides sort of hounding himself, Walton, on sort of his, less than stellar career in San Diego. I think he obviously felt quite bad about his injuries and what he couldn't do in his own hometown. But he also reserved some pretty not so shy comments about Sterling. The quote I got here was, "The checks bounced higher than the basketballs when Donald Sterling took over. The basketball was awful, and the business side was immoral, dishonest, corrupt, and illegal. Other than that, it was all fine." I mean, yeah, stinging words.
Yeah, and through my research for the book, there's like lots of examples of this type of behavior. So there was a guy, Ted Poldesky, who was a general manager for the team for a period of time.
Sure.
And when he was fired, I think he was fired, he filed a lawsuit against the team. Now, he alleged, so these are only, and this is a big part of the Donald Sterling narrative, that there are a lot of allegations against Donald Sterling. Very few of them have ever been proven. So, but he alleged that as during his time working in the Clippers front office, that he was asked to part of his job was to partake in illegal activities. So things like they would knowingly send checks to creditors that they didn't sign on purpose, knowing that then that they'd have to send the money back, send the check back to say, "Hey guys, you forgot to sign it." Or they would send checks to people that they owed money to, knowing that there was no money in the bank account and that the checks would bounce. So, I mean, you can look at the cheapskate side of thing from the view of recruiting players, but even if you look at just the basic thing about paying for hotel bills or paying people who have done work for the franchise, like graphic designers or people who are producing merchandise or whatever. And it seemed that Donald Sterling's ownership was characterized by a great reluctance to spend money, like very, very careful with the money and how it was spent, and which I don't think is unusual. I mean, I think one of the misconceptions a lot of people have is that people who are wealthy are free and easy with their money. I mean, my experience is that people that are very, very wealthy are often very, very cautious with what they spend and how they spend it. But I think that's the way that the franchise was run once Donald took over. And there are lots of stories from when I interviewed Paul Silas, who was the coach, the first coach under I believe the first coach under Donald Sterling's ownership. Paul Silas was asked to tape the players' ankles. Like Donald had asked him, "Oh, could we get rid of the trainer? If we sack the trainer, could you guys just do the taping of the players' ankles before the game?" And Paul Silas was laughing about this 30 years later, but it's like, what an absurd prospect. Like, so the person that's going to be in charge of the team, the person who's, he's a somewhat of an authority figure, the players need to respect, and then before the game, he's going to be sort of down on their knees taping their ankles. Like, it just shows a complete lack of understanding of the sort of dynamics of a locker room. And there's countless examples of that like that I came across during my time researching the book. Like, another one was in his first season, the Clippers nearly forfeited a game because there was part of the agreement between the players and the league was that any flight over 2 hours had to be first-class flight. These guys have, some of their bodies are 7 feet, 6'10", and to cramp them into economy for a long flight is quite frankly not reasonable. Anyway, the Clippers were flying to Seattle, and they got to the airport and they were booked on a coach flight. And at the time, the team's union leader was Joe Jellybean Bryan, who's Kobe's dad. And they had a quick meeting, the players, and they said, "We're not getting on the plane. We're not going to play the game. Like, you either put us in a first-class seats or we're not flying." And there was a very real, Paul Silas told me that it was like a very real prospect that the game was going to be cancelled because the players were just adamant that they were not going to fly, and they couldn't change them to first-class seats at that late time. And in the end, Paul Silas was able to use his sort of personal relationship with Joe and the other players to say, "If you guys get on the plane and play this one game for me, I promise you that this will never happen again." And they went up, they played in Seattle, they lost. And then when they returned back to San Diego, Paul Silas just went to Donald and said, like, "This can never happen again. Like, you cannot book them on coach seats because you want to save yourself money." And this is the way that the franchise was run.
Well, and it showed on the court too, right? I mean, Silas, you got to give him credit. I mean, he lasted 3 seasons through all of this, including, well, you look at the stats. I mean, I don't think they got above 4th in their division. God, I think once maybe in 10 years, right? Even going into Los Angeles. And 81-82, I mean, they only won 17 games, for God's sakes. I mean, not only were they last in their division, they were 207 record, right? So I'm really curious to sort of, was it sort of left hand and right hand, not, or was it sort of all one big pile of doom? I mean, I guess what Sterling's ways certainly didn't help the cause that much, but, there are certain situations where, you can kind of wall off the front office from, the play on the team. I mean, the fact that Silas was still the coach, for those 3 years is maybe a little testament to that, but I don't know. I get the gloom seemed to set in pretty early, it seems, both on the court and certainly, in the offices.
I mean, in that first season, that's the season that Donald Sterling famously told there was a luncheon of sort of local business people and stuff, but someone had a tape recorder and recorded the comments. But he said that their aim was to finish last because at the time the rumor was that Ralph Sampson was going to come out of college a year early, and they wanted to try and draft Ralph Sampson. So he publicly proclaimed that we're trying to lose as many games as we can to finish last to get Ralph Sampson. And that caused a huge scandal at the time because, this guy had been owner of the Clippers for like 3 months or something, and here he is publicly talking about tanking. Now, throughout NBA history, there's been lots of teams that have deliberately lost games to position themselves well for the upcoming draft, but you don't have the owner publicly proclaiming the fact that they're trying to lose games. And the players I spoke to who played on that team spoke about how that had a really negative impact on the sort of morale of the team. That
Mike. I mean, Mike.
Yeah.
what a great I got your backs. No, really.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that he went from sort of saying, "Yeah, we're going to spend money, we're going to do what it takes," and then realized pretty quickly, "Oh, this team's not really that good," and then quickly went the other way to say, "Well, let's see how much money we can save and how sort of minimalistic we can run this operation."
All right. Well, come 82 or so, if there was any doubts about sort of the oddness, I guess, of Donald Sterling's approach to running a basketball team, some of the interesting ideas and plans really started to come out in public, right? So, the NBA fines him a bunch of money, I guess, for some of those comments about the potential for tanking and maybe getting Sampson in the draft. But he also, I guess this is around the first time that publicly he kind of let loose the idea of he wanted to relocate the team to L.A. Maybe some interest, some story around some of that, because I'm wondering if this was sort of a standard, holding the current city hostage for a better arena or a better situation, or had he kind of had designs on L.A. maybe from the get-go or earlier on and really wasn't thinking about San Diego long-term at all?
Yeah, look, I don't get the sense that it was around trying to get a better offer from San Diego. I don't know whether he initially bought the team with the intention of keeping them in San Diego, but one thing was clear, that by the end of the first season, he decided, why don't I just go play in LA? Now, so it was the end of that first season. That's how quickly that they were sort of, pulling the tent up and preparing themselves to move up the road.
Was that an open, I'm sorry, and having not done the research as deeply as you have, was that kind of an open secret after that first season, or?
So what happened was they had a press conference and they just announced, we're going to LA. And then, and so what had happened was the Los Angeles Sports Arena had made a pitch to the Clippers to say, if you come, because the Lakers had obviously moved from the Sports Arena to the Forum. So the Sports Arena now had all these empty dates, and they were looking for another tenant. Now, so they had offered the Clippers, X amount of dollars to come up and play there. And so they just announced, we're moving. Now, the press conference was held before any discussion was had with the NBA. So the NBA knew nothing about this, and Donald Sterling has held a press conference. Now, he was at the press conference, but he didn't speak a word. He just stood in the background. And the media said, so Ted Poldesky was the guy that was fielding all the questions. And the media had said to Ted Poldesky, why is Donald not saying anything? And he said, Donald's decided it's better not to say anything until it's all official with the NBA. It's like, well, if that's the case, wouldn't you then not have a press conference? Wouldn't you not go and do it through the right channels and make sure it was all okay with the NBA? Now, the issues with that was that the rules of the league was that they weren't allowed to move to Los Angeles unless the Lakers said it was okay. Now, clearly, Jerry Buss and Donald had conversations, and Jerry Buss was okay with him coming to Los Angeles. But the problem was that the way he had done it, so after that press conference, this just set off a chain reaction of lawsuits. There was this person was suing, there were season ticket holders that were suing Donald Sterling, saying, you've sold us season tickets for the San Diego Clippers, and now you're moving the team. So you've engaged in sort of fraudulent trade. The San Diego Sports Arena was suing the Los Angeles Sports Arena for trying to poach their tenant. There was just all these lawsuits going back and forth. And I think that Sterling realized pretty quickly, this is not going to work, and then quickly retreated and said, no, we're going to stay in San Diego. Now, again, you imagine the impact this would have on the fan base of San Diego. So at that second press conference, they were asked, Ted Poldesky was asked, so what's the commitment? How long are you staying in San Diego? And he's like, no, we're going to be here a long time. But I don't think anyone really believed that there was any long-term plan to stay in San Diego from that point.
Well, yeah, genie's out of the bottle, right? So, and the team not doing any better, and why would fans even come support? So it sounds to me like he kind of sort of exacerbated an already circulating drain downward, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think at that point it was probably similar to what John Y. Brown did in the last few years in Buffalo, in that if you know that you want to move a team, that's your long-term plan, then it makes sense in the short term to let the team sort of suffer, you don't want to win too many games, you don't want to spend too much money. What you want to have is you want to have local fan interest dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, so that if you then say we're moving, you're going to have less opposition to the move. And that's what the next 2 years in San Diego, my reading was that he was quite happy to just sort of let the team flounder while he worked on plan B to get to Los Angeles.
All right, so the league clearly not happy about this, right? I mean, there's a point in 82, it looks like, that he was forced to at least hand over the operations of the team. I mean, Alan Rothenberg, for God's sakes, brought in to kind of become the team president, he of soccer and Los Angeles Olympics doings and the World Cup doings, et cetera, later on. It seems like he also, Sterling, kind of recognized that he might have had the tiger by the tail a bit too, and seeing his pal Al Davis in the NFL kind of doing the same things, trying to get out of Oakland and going to LA. It seems like he almost got emboldened maybe by some of that to kind of say, well, wait a minute. If the league won't allow me to do it, well, why don't I just take him to court and just actually do it? Yeah.
So two things you touched on there, Tim. So one is that the league had the chance to get rid of Donald after one season. So they had actually commenced proceedings to have him sort of kicked out of the league. And that was done through two stages. The first stage was there was a meeting of 6 owners, I think it was 6, that sort of met to say, are we going to refer this to the full owners meeting where everyone's present? And that they voted unanimously to say, yeah, we think we've got to get rid of this guy. He's not in the best interest of the league. And then in the weeks leading up to that full owners meeting, there was like multiple quotes in the media from other NBA owners saying, this guy doesn't have our support. Like, us as a collective group of owners, we're in favor of getting rid of him. Like the way he's running the team is just not what the NBA is about. So there's the very, very high likelihood that the Clippers were going to be taken off Donald Sterling. He was going to be forced to sell them. And, I think that he made a sort of strategic decision to stop the proceedings from happening and say, all right, I'll sell the team. You don't need to kick me out. I'll sell the team. And then amazingly, the NBA said, all right, you're going to sell the team. We'll just stop the proceedings to have the team taken off you. And then all he did was just sort of chill out for a few months. And then he went back to the NBA and said, oh, look, I'm going to do things differently. I've got Alan Rothenberg on hand, and we're going to do this, and we're going to spend this money. And then it seemed as if like all was forgotten, and that he was allowed to just continue to remain on as owner. But if the league had have followed through, then Donald Sterling's time as Clippers owner would have been limited to just that one season.
All right. Well, if that weren't enough, and then he moves the team, right? He basically moves the team to LA without the NBA's blessing, and the league sues him, and then he countersues. Is that sort of what happens?
Yeah. And so what you said was right. It was Al Davis had done the same thing with the Raiders, and I think Donald by trade is a lawyer, and he realized the NBA may not want me to move, but can they stop me from moving? And the only rule to stop him from moving was the 75-mile rule, which was you couldn't move within the 75-mile radius of an existing team. And he knew that Jerry Buss was going to support him moving to Los Angeles. So he just said, we're moving. He just announced it and said, we're moving. And that was it. They were moving. And I believe the 84 draft that they still... Maybe the NBA still had the name as the San Diego Clippers on the draft. But there was a whole legal dispute where the NBA then sued the Clippers countersued, and that dispute sort of dragged on for a few years where they were playing in Los Angeles, but there was a very real prospect that they could be forced to move back to San Diego and the team could be taken off Donald Sterling. But he just made the call that the law was going to be on his side and that he was going to win any lawsuit, and just kind of doubled down and said, well, I'll see you in court, which has become kind of his modus operandi, where he just take people to court and be prepared to fight it out in the legal arena.
Well, that's just nuts. And on the court though, so let's shift back to that for a second, because I don't think there's any other word besides laughing stock, right? I remember this vaguely as a kid. It was always the Clippers is kind of like, they're still, what is their deal, right? It was, whether it was the distractions of the front office married with the lack of spending. It seems like the NBA had, 2 or 3 times the trouble with this franchise, on the court being certainly a big part of it.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, I think that I think that there was a change in his ownership philosophy. In the early days, I do believe that he was trying to put together good teams. I do believe that he wanted to be successful. They were victims of a lot of bad luck in that sort of mid '80s to late '80s period. In the sort of the early days in Los Angeles, I mean, they had their trio of their big three, their best three players were Norm Nixon, Derek Smith, and Marcus Johnson. And that was a really good, that was a really good nucleus to build a team around. And all three of them suffered serious long-term injuries in the space of a few months of each other. Now, there's no NBA team that can lose their three best players to injury, to season-ending injuries, and not suffer sort of catastrophic results. But that period of time was very much characterized by just constant bad luck on the court of, Marcus Johnson got injured. I mean, even the way they got injured. Norm Nixon got injured playing in a softball game in Central Park over the summer. He stepped in a pothole and injured his knee. Marcus Johnson got injured because he ran into Benoit Benjamin's bulbous chest and injured his neck. But he injured his neck crashing into a teammate's chest. I mean, even the ways the injuries occurred were quite bizarre.
How do you stay a fan of this team, or how can you become a fan of this team? Did you talk to anybody who was a fan or of the team, either in San Diego or in their initial years in LA, or were you mostly focused on the story of the management and the players and the coaching staff?
Look, my contact with the fans of the team has really come more post publishing of the book. Lots and lots and lots of fans have got in contact with me, which has been really, really nice and really positive to hear. Good things about the book, that they've enjoyed reading it. And look, most of the people who've stayed fans of the team are just that very sort of loyal, fan base. People, especially people from the 80s era, they're people that didn't like the Lakers, and so they wanted to support a local team, and they didn't like the Lakers, and were prepared to sort of stick through the Clippers through thick and thin. But it is a very interesting psyche to think that, like, this team that really, it's hard to say, because it's like, I was about to say this team that never had any prospect for success, but throughout their history, there's these constant times where things were looking up. There were lots of opportunities for optimism to creep in, where you could look and say, they've got a good team, they've got everything ready, all the pieces are in place, we're ready to make a run here. And it's only in hindsight that you look and say, well, there's 20 years here of just dismal play. But actually, at the time, it wasn't 20 years of sort of grey skies. There were lots of times in that period where it was like, it looked like they were all set to do well. And there were seasons where they got off to a really good start, or where they had recruited and had a nice roster on paper in the off season. But then something always seemed to come along, whether it be just pure bad luck through injury, or scandal, or mismanagement, tight-fisted owner, and some of it was self-inflicted wounds. But throughout that period of sort of like the early 80s to sort of the early 2000s, there were lots of times where it appeared that the team was going to do well.
Yeah, it just maybe spoken like a fan, right, or a true fan. It sounds like you're kind of saying more of the bad luck thing than the ineptitude thing. But okay, so Danny Manning, number one draft pick in 87, 88, okay, tears his ACL, right, during the 88, 89 campaign. Okay. That's bad luck, right, or whatever. But, there's a point at which, I'm thinking of like Santa Anita right now with all the horses, being euthanized and all the troubles going on there right now. At what point does bad luck kind of, has a source, right? And there's an environment maybe that's tight-fistedness. Maybe there's not enough towards medical training, or just the morale, and that just begets bad vibes. And I don't know, but I mean, this is a team that it's unconscionable almost when you look at. So there's a stat, right? So I know we're going to project out, but I think in the 33 years Sterling owned the team, right? This is through 2014 when he was forced to sell it. The Clippers lost 50 or more games 22 times, 22 seasons. They lost 60 or more games in over 8 seasons, and they once lost 70 games, and not even including their 9-41 record during the lockout season of 98 and 99. I mean, there's something to that beyond bad luck. No?
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that if you look at some of their high profile draft picks and things like that, and then you think what sort of environment they were going into, like in terms of, okay, Michael Olowokandi drafted with the first overall pick. At the time he went to the Clippers, they didn't have a coaching staff in place. Like, they didn't have a coach. And the reason for that was because Donald Sterling anticipated that there was going to be a lockout, and he decided, well, if the lockout happens as I anticipate, I'm going to have to pay the salary of the coach and the assistant coach over the summertime, but there will be a lockout in place. So why don't I just wait? I won't appoint a coach yet and save myself some money. Now, that may sound fine from a sort of fiscal standpoint. The problem with that was that other teams were going out and appointing coaches during this time. So the Clippers were then missing out on the first choice, second choice, third choice coaches because they were all being snapped up by other teams. And there was when the lockout finished, there was no sort of structure in place to support the development of a young player like Olowokandi. Now, if Olowokandi gets drafted by the San Antonio Spurs, I don't think he would have gone on to have a Shaq-like career, but maybe he goes on to have a better career than what he did. But when you've got, like you said, there's an environment that's very toxic, very negative. People don't want to be there. Players who get traded there or get drafted there are unhappy to be there, especially guys who played at other NBA teams. So people who've come from other franchises. You know, when I interviewed players, some of them, players who were drafted by the Clippers said, it wasn't that bad for me for the first few years. It wasn't until I left and went to another team. And then I realized just how under-resourced the Clippers were and how poorly run they were compared to other franchises. But not having the same money spent on medical staff and training and monitoring the players' needs. Even things like the Clippers didn't have a regular training base through the 90s. So the players would finish the game and then they would be told, okay, tomorrow you guys are going to Fairfax High School for training, and practice is going to be at 4 p.m. because that's the only time we can get the court because the Fairfax volleyball team's using it before then. And they would turn up for practice, and the high school volleyball players would still be on the court playing volleyball, and then they'd have to get the poles down and everything and wind the basketball hoops down before they started playing. And that was the environment that they were operating in, whereas other NBA teams had a regular training base, had regular practice times, had a facility that they could go to get, massage and treatment and all that sort of stuff. So I think that there's obviously a very big degree of bad luck, but I think it also is linked to the way that the franchise was run.
So what about the sports arena, right? Obviously an older facility relative to that of the Forum where the Lakers were playing. Obviously, this is before the Staples Center. And I'm quite curious as to why Buss would actually allow, or at least nod approvingly of a second team in LA, which arguably, I think in today's world would have been looked at as an exclusive franchise for a metropolitan area. It feels to me like the Clippers' experience at the game, certainly the play, very much second tier to that of the Lakers. And maybe, I don't know, the Buss family didn't mind that because the Lakers were perceived as sort of the premier franchise in the NBA versus the Clippers.
It's very interesting, isn't it, Tim? Because it's like in hindsight, you can say, oh, yeah, it was a perfectly fine decision for Jerry Buss. But no one would have anticipated back in 1984 that the Clippers would have such sustained period of just, cellar dwelling, lack of success. And equally, you couldn't have anticipated how much success the Lakers would have had in that time. And I mean, if it goes any differently, if the Clippers were able to have, say in the early 90s, the Clippers had 5 or 6 seasons of, playoff basketball, maybe appearance in the NBA Finals. Let's say the Lakers had a sustained downturn at the same time when Magic retired. and they weren't able to get Kobe and Shaq. I mean, in that alternate universe, the Clippers would definitely be taking away some amount of the sort of market share of the Lakers. So it is a really interesting decision by Jerry Buss to allow to just give the nod and to just wave them through. I mean, I can only think that it was linked to their sort of personal connection between the two guys. It couldn't have been made as a business decision.
Or even as a local rivalry, as MLS has done with LAFC and the Galaxy or the two New York teams, right? They create a local derby. I mean, it's hardly a derby when one of the teams can't even, break 20 games winning in a season. Well, all right, but they also, though, Sterling was also pretty shrewd in trying to at least cast an eye outside of the sports arena, which I'm sure, again, was not the sort of a fun arena for sure, and with character, I guess, but not sort of the most modern of structures. Why not move the team to Anaheim? It's clear they played at the Pond for a number of games, for a number of seasons. Wouldn't that have been an easier answer, right? With Orange County, that would have been a nice, a geographical separation from quote unquote Los Angeles, a more modern arena. Why not that?
Yeah. So that was like in the mid '90s where there was this flirtation between the Clippers management and the city of Anaheim. They started off playing some exhibition games, and then they moved a portion of their schedule down there. And initially, Andy Rosa, made it known to say, well, we're not actually, we're not moving to Anaheim. We're not sort of testing out this is a new home base. We're just trying to expand our fan base. But at some point, after a couple of years of playing sort of 5 or 6 games down in Anaheim, the city of Anaheim sort of made a play to say, we want you to move here permanently. We're going to pay you. There was a big package on offer of $90 million to sign sort of 8-year contract to move your all 41 home games. The name of the team would be changed from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Anaheim Clippers. When I was researching the book, I was just thinking this move would have made a lot of sense. The Pond was a much more modern arena. Obviously, they'd been in LA for, 15 years at that time, and their brand was really quite toxic. And it's like you're looking at thinking, how are they going to ever sort of recover here? I mean, you've got the least credible brand name in the NBA playing in the backyard of the most sort of marquee name in the NBA, or if not the most, the second most. It's the Celtics or the Lakers, or the Lakers or the Celtics, right? So it made a lot of sense, and so everyone was anticipating that they were going to move. There was all these talks, high-level talks taking place between the Sterling and the mayor of Anaheim, and I think everyone anticipated the move was going to happen. And when it didn't happen, again, it's on record. There's a quote, I think it's from Andy Rosa, where he says that I think the quote's from one of the councilmen from Anaheim, where he says that one of the big stumbling blocks was that the commute for Donald Sterling from his Malibu home down to Anaheim was one of the big reasons why he didn't want to move the team. So you go all the way back to the genesis of the team, which is Irv Levin wanted to have a closer commute, and he wanted to move from Boston because he lived in Southern California. And then again, the same sort of theme coming through where the owner doesn't want to have to travel too far, doesn't want to have to drive too far to the games. And even though it probably would have made a lot of commercial sense to move the team, it never happened.
Well, is it any reason why then people started piling on in the aughts, talking about how he was, by comparison, probably one of the worst, if not the worst owner in professional sports? I mean, the hits just seem to keep on coming. I mean, ESPN, the magazine, and Forbes, and the New York Times, and the Sporting News, and I mean, I'm certain local media, and frankly, I'm sure the NBA itself and national media. There's, moribund is maybe too generous a word, and all these other sort of opportunities and or shenanigans, I guess. I'll throw it out there, and then you react to it, but. Were those racist remarks in 2014 that ultimately landed him not only in trouble, but on the docket to sell the team? As a fan, was that the best thing that ever happened to the franchise?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that the team was the team was doomed so long as Donald was in charge. And there was no way. I mean, you could see what happened in 2014. He wasn't giving up. Donald Sterling's philosophy, the way he made his money, was to never sell, an asset. There was no way he was going to get rid of the Clippers. No way. And you could see he went down swinging. He was not going to give up ownership of that team, so it was going to take something sort of monumental, like what happened, something that's never this. I mean, you can imagine at the time that happened, Tim. That was when I was in the middle of researching and writing the book, and it was just surreal for me personally. It was just like, I can't believe that this is happening. That this team that I'm writing about, where I started writing about them, they were this sort of niche franchise that not many people outside of people who live in Southern California or NBA fans, but they weren't a team that was on the forefront of sports fans around the world's minds. And then all of a sudden, this scandal happened with Donald Sterling, with this conversation being recorded. But I mean, Steve Ballmer's brought a completely different ownership philosophy to the team, which has allowed them to, I mean, you look at where they are now, and they're on paper, they seem like they're ready to contend for the championship.
Well, but it's so certainly, and there's obviously new life, and obviously the team has become much more competitive. Ballmer certainly is quite the animated owner, and going back to what you said earlier, but Sterling is a great example of we've heard it and seen this with various ownerships of various pro teams over the many decades, right? It's sort of the, even if you own a franchise and you run it lean and mean, you're still going to be, for all intents and purposes, in the major leagues, going to see your asset increase in value, so that even when you're forced to sell the team, you're still going to make a handsome profit. But obviously, you don't engender a whole lot of love and affection from a base of fans that, we know sports, right? It's not just an asset, right? There are things that are much more less tangible when it comes to sort of rooting for a professional sports team. And I think at least Ballmer, at least on the surface, at least, comes across as being a fan invested into the success of the team and wants to, see the team and is based with the fans, succeed. But let's look at it also through, a more pragmatic set of lenses here. There's still, if you will, the second or arguably the third tenant now in this Staples Center, which is arguably one of the most premier facilities in the country, if not beyond. There's still, I guess, rumblings about, do you want to have two teams play in the same arena in the NBA when, LA is such a gigantic market, from the idea, the opportunity of finding their own way and finding their own arena, if not in LA. I mean, is it any better, I guess, is the question I'm trying to struggle with here. Ballmer certainly injected a lot of enthusiasm and attention to this franchise. But can it ever get over the hump of being, number two to the Lakers and arguably number three in their own building? Yeah,
I'm a big advocate for, if they move to Inglewood or if they move, I think that having two teams play in the same arena, it kind of makes it hard to distinguish the teams as being different. I think that the Lakers being at the Forum and the Clippers being at the Sports Arena, it made them. They were different teams, and going to the games was a different experience. I mean, now it's a different experience because there's no Lakers jerseys up. They put the big pictures of the Clippers place up, but it's the same arena, it's the same geographic location, and I think that if the team was based in a different area, then you could have more sort of local links with the community in that area, and the Lakers. So I'm a big fan. I think the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks is a much better sort of model for the NBA to have than to have the two LA teams playing in the same arena. And obviously Ballmer's doing a lot of work at the moment to move the team. And I think that would be a good outcome.
Yeah, and as we had with our conversation with Dan Issel this week, Louisville, he's very much involved in trying to maybe bring a team to Louisville. I would argue there are a handful of teams that are, if holding their current cities hostage for arenas and all that kind of stuff. I'm an outsider. I'm not a fan of the team. I grew up on the East Coast. I've got other basketball loyalties. I only look at it through, I guess, the prism of history and the relative, the woefulness, I guess, of this franchise and maybe its snake bit nature. But, we see this play out. I mean, I've seen this in Major League Soccer, right? So here in Chicago, right, the Chicago Fire, a very successful team out of the gate back in 98 and 2000 and some early championships and that kind of stuff. They moved to an arena or a stadium in the suburbs, not very conveniently accessible. I mean, now they're really talking about moving back to the city of Chicago proper and, frankly, rebranding, right? So just whitewashing the entire name of the team. And I don't know. The Clippers name, certainly, it's interesting. We love to regale in sort of the history. This is a long-lasting team and nickname with more negative, I think, association than positive ones. So I guess the question really is, even under new ownership or current ownership of Steve Ballmer team, there is the arena thing. They are still the number 2, if you will, basketball franchise in the LA area. There is that legacy, that history, that cloud that still somehow overhangs them. Can they ever get over the hump? I mean, is it? I don't know. You have to wonder how this ultimately resolves itself and/or gets to the promised land, if ever.
Yeah, I'm kind of biased because of my work on the book. I feel like I wouldn't want them to change their name. I want them to stay in Southern California.
Oh, they're forever the underdog, right? I mean,
Yeah. I think it makes it more special, especially, if a team with Kawhi and Paul George on it, can lead the LA Clippers to the championship. I think that's a really kind of special ending for it won't be an ending as such, but I think it's I think it's really meaningful. And I like the idea of, I think they should embrace their history more rather than try and turn away from it to say, well, look at what we were and look what we've become. I did expect when Ballmer took over, when they kind of got the rebranding happen and the new logo and the new jerseys and everything, I expected that the team name would change as well, but they've kept the same name, and I'm a big fan of keeping it. And when you talk to Clippers supporters, for the most part, I mean, I'm not a spokesperson for them, but for the most part, they're very, very adamant that they want to keep the team name because they've been through all of that stuff, and they've been through, being the laughing stock and people, poking fun at them, and they want to be able to have that same team name when they can turn the tables and finally claim a championship. But it's interesting, Tim, like with the book, one of the things that I got a lot of criticism for was the title of the book. A lot of Clippers fans really disliked the title of the book. And I wasn't calling it The Curse to be disrespectful or to be sort of poking fun at the Clippers. I called it that because I felt like that was the best sort of title to encapsulate the experience of the last sort of 4 decades of what it would be like being involved with the Clippers and involved on the level of being a fan of the Clippers, like just that perpetual having your hopes lifted and then something else going wrong, and then having your hopes lifted again and something else going wrong, and there's just that feeling of this level of misfortune can't just be down to bad luck. There's something else at play here.
Well, if you grew up in Chicago, that's called the Chicago Cubs, at least until a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There are, and the Boston Red Sox for some time. I mean, there's definitely parallels in other sports, but and this will be the last question, and I'll let you promote more directly. But in terms of a title for this book, I think it's quite apt. Now, that said, I'm not a lifelong Clippers fan, and I just think there's more basketball fans out there than there are Clippers fans, and arguably you need to sell books and get the story out there. So, but you can't deny there's just been, call it a curse or call it, just 40 years of bad luck or just unfortunateness. But, but to your point, maybe there's something to be had there, regardless of a lot of it being negative or at least sideways. It's still history, right? It's still a legacy. It's still something that's just not, manufactured like a brand new team is and all that kind of stuff. So I guess there's some level of admiration, I guess, I would throw towards Clippers fans' way, including yourself. But let me ask you this question as we sort of round out here. Why? Why continue to root for this team? What is it in the Clippers fan base and from wherever it started Can you maybe describe sort of the level of hope and or anticipation that things will improve and will get better? Is it misplaced, or is it naive to think that it is going to get better, or is it just? I'm having a hard time trying to figure out why people would hang on for so long when they've been so disappointed for so many seasons.
Yeah, and there's lots of people I've come in contact with who've turned their back on the team and then come back to them because they just feel so downtrodden by the experience of being a Clippers fan. But I think in some ways also that makes them, like if you're a fan of the San Antonio Spurs and you win another championship, it's like, yep, but you've had that experience. You've had it multiple times, And this is a fan base of people, especially, there's lots of Clipper fans who've been Clipper fans since 2012, like they came on board when Blake Griffin was drafted. Yeah, and that's fine. I don't have any issue with that. But I'm talking about the people who've been fans since the Darius Miles days, or fans since the Danny Manning days, or fans since the Norm Nixon days. And there are people that have had season tickets there since they first moved to Los Angeles in 1984, and they still have season tickets and they still go to the games now. For those people, there's something really special about this pursuit of this first championship. That's got to be more gratifying than if a successful franchise wins again this year, because for these fans, they've never experienced that, and they've also been through such a hard road and been through so many negative experiences to get there that has to make it more meaningful.
Yeah, it's easy to root for a winner, right? And bandwagon and all that kind of stuff. But it takes a rare breed, right, to kind of truly root for a team through thick and thin, or mostly thick, mostly thin, frankly. Sorry, and it is saying something. It's a badge of honor, and I guess once that mountain is fully climbed, let's say with a championship, God forbid, all the more reason to relish, right? Given all the, without pain and suffering, there probably isn't anything really to celebrate, right? So, all right, well, tell us about the book, where we can find it, and frankly, have you been approached by anybody, given it's largely about a team in Los Angeles now, about maybe documenting this or other ways of telling the story beyond the book?
Funny you should say that. I was actually right now I'm meant to have a scheduled call with somebody about exactly that, but it's been delayed, so I'm going to ring them probably tomorrow. But
you got an audience base that would love to see a documentary or some way, shape, or form, right? There's plenty of stuff in there that I think would be frankly a revelation to a lot of fans that don't know any better and think that the franchise started with Blake Griffith or Steve Ballmer, for that matter.
Yeah, and I think that I beyond my involvement in the project, I just think it's a really great story. And I think it's kind of the story that it sounds cliche, but it's kind of told itself, that there was just so many, that one thing led to the next, that there's just so many great stories in the book that if you're a fan of sort of professional sports and you like. One of my motivations for writing the book was that, I'm myself a big consumer of sports books and really interested to hear about stories of teams and players and stuff. But, there's certain teams that you've heard the story of a million times over, like the Boston Celtics. We all know the history of that franchise, and we all know all the sort of important moments and whatever, because they've been made into documentaries and there's 27 different books on it. And my thought is that there's all these other great franchises that have all this amazing history that people don't know about or isn't as well publicized. So I'm hopeful that something more will come from the book, but I don't know. We'll see what happens.
As Ralph Lawler would say, oh me, oh my. There's no question that his franchise is it's an unbelievable set of twists and turns, and I'm sure more to come as the whole drama around whatever arena situation looks like. It looks like it's going to be in Inglewood if Steve Ballmer and his management team have their way, although lots of interesting intrigue and legal battles ahead for sure. on that front. But in the interim, the best way to sort of set yourself up for the next few chapters, if you will, of this drama known as the LA Clippers is to get this book. It's a great read, and Mick has painstakingly put together great interviews and great stats and all that kind of stuff. It's called The Curse, The Colorful and Chaotic History of the LA Clippers, and we highly recommend it hey, if you're a Clippers fan, but just a basketball fan generally, and just outright curious about just the unbelievable bad luck and terrible management decisions and just unbelievable stuff that's gone on with this franchise. It's a great story and probably more to come. And we encourage you to find a copy of the book wherever you find good books. Of course, you can find a link to the book on our website, of course, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with Mick Minas, click through to the Amazon link, and give us a few shekels of love, why don't you, by buying the book that way. We'd appreciate it. I'm sure Mick would, too. If you want to follow Mick on Twitter, make sure you follow the right one. This is not the wacky reality show guy out of Cyprus. No. This is Mick Minas out in Melbourne, Australia. And his Twitter is mminas8. That's MMINAS 8, the number 8, on Twitter. And of course, you can follow not only him there, but also you can also find out more about him by buying the damn book, for God's sakes, why don't you? And you can find out more about us, for God's sakes, why don't you, on our website. As I said, goodseatsstillavailable.com. You will find all of our social media links there, like on Twitter. We're at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You will find us on Facebook. On the website, you will find a convenient link to our email newsletter if you want to get that each week and sort of know what's going on with the show a few days ahead of the average Joe on the street. And let's see, you can also send us email if you'd like, either from the website or directly, for God's sakes. Go ahead. And that's hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. We, of course, also want to thank our pal Jerry Payne and his friends at Podfly Productions. They help us production-wise, editorially. They do all the good stuff that makes this show sound halfway decent. We couldn't do it without them. And you can find out more about Podfly at podfly.net. And gosh, I think that's it for this week. We appreciate it. And as we leave you now, I guess we'll keep our fingers crossed. On behalf of all the current Clippers fans, and Mick Minas in particular, let's see if the team stays in LA. It's a pretty interesting place to be and to live and to grow and do business and just enjoy life. And we leave you now with, of course, the inimitable Randy Newman as he and maybe the Clippers revel in loving LA. Take care.
Hate New York City. It's cold and it's damp, and all the people dressed like monkeys. Let's leave Chicago to the Eskimos. That town's a little bit too rugged for you and me, you bad girl. Rolling down Imperial Highway, the big nasty red at my side. Santa Ana winds blowing hot from the north. We were born to ride. Roll down the window, put down the top, crank up the Beach Boys, baby. Don't let the music stop. We gonna ride it till we just can't ride it no more. From the side bay to the valley, from the west side to the east side, everybody very happy, 'cause the sun is shining all the time. It's like another perfect day. I love LA. platform over there, man, he's down on his knees. Look at these women, ain't nothing like them nowhere. Century Boulevard, we love it. Victory Boulevard,